Ladies and gentlemen, please rise for the arrival of the official party. Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to today's ceremony. Please rise for the national anthem.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. Good afternoon, and thank you for attending today's ceremony. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to introduce to you the City of Boston's Veteran Commissioner, Ms. Giselle Sterling.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is an honor to be here with you today on behalf of Mayor Walsh. I know he's disappointed that he couldn't make it, but I know he appreciates the time that you've taken to be a part of this event. Mr. Secretary, it is always a pleasure to have you in Boston. We know just how important your role is to the safety and security of our nation, and that your responsibilities take you all over the country and all over the globe. So we consider ourselves fortunate to be able to share this time here and this space here with you today. And what a great space it is. The library is, as you know, a rich in culture and tradition, and has a presence of historical figures like this library was named for, and like our memorials and are sculpted after. So it's perfectly fitting that our ceremony takes place here, because the naming of a ship is both great in tradition and a symbol of progress. The people and places that these ships are named after will carry on a legacy for future generations to learn from and appreciate, just as we appreciate them today. So today, it's on behalf of the Mayor that we thank you, Mr. Secretary, for joining us today. We thank all of our elected officials and our friends and keepers of the Copley Library. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to introduce the 75th Secretary of the Navy, Ray Mabus.
Thank you all for being here and on a great Navy day. And Typical Boston day, I'm afraid. I spent, and perhaps misspent, 5 years in Boston. I was in the Navy. I joined my ship, Boston Naval Shipyard, and then went to law school across the river for between 1970 and 1975. I will have to admit that I didn't go to the library very much, but I spent a good deal of time at two institutions close to here, Fenway Park and the Boston Garden. So thank you all. It's great to be back here, and I'll put in a plug for my family. My oldest daughter Elizabeth started Harvard Law School 3 weeks ago, so I have even more reason to come to Boston now. Our Navy and our Marine Corps uniquely provide presence around the world, around the clock. We ensure stability, we reassure allies, we deter potential adversaries, and we provide our nation's leaders with options in times of crisis. We're America's away team. We never get a home game, and we don't want a home game, because sailors, equally in times of peace and war, are in the right place, not just at the right time, but all the time. There is no next best thing to being there. In every case, from high-end combat to irregular warfare to disaster relief to humanitarian assistance, our naval assets get there faster, we stay on station longer, we bring everything we need, and because we operate from sovereign American territory, we don't have to ask any other nation's permission to do the job that we need to do. But to get that presence, you have to have gray hulls on the horizon. We've reversed the decline in shipbuilding that occurred from 2001 to 2008. In the 7 years before I took office, the naval fleet declined from 316 ships to 278 ships. And during that time, 41 ships were put under contract. I've been in office now almost exactly 7 years, a little bit more. And in that time, we've contracted for 85 ships at a 20% smaller top line. And we've done it not at the expense of aircraft. We bought 35% more aircraft than in the previous 7 years. With our efforts and the support of Congress, we guarantee that we will reach 300 ships by 2019 and our assessed need of 308 ships by 2021. Now, one of the great responsibilities and great privileges that I have is naming these ships. Secretaries of the Navy, since the very first one, Benjamin Stoddard, in 1798, have not only done the naming of ships, but also providing the naming conventions, what types of names we're going to give our ships. So, submarines are named after states, generally. Littoral combat ships after cities. Destroyers after naval heroes, members of Congress, previous secretaries of the Navy. Carriers generally after presidents, and amphibious ships after marine battles. And we do this to honor our history, but also to connect America and the American people to the American Navy. Honoring naval heroes, sailors and Marines who have sacrificed so much for this country, is an important way of venerating American values. That's why I've named 8 ships after Medal of Honor recipients. People who fought in World War II, in Korea, in Vietnam. The latest 2 I named this past Saturday at the Ole Miss Alabama game. I named 2 ships after 2 Mississippians. Pure coincidence that I was governor of that state. But 2 Mississippians, one Jack Lucas, awarded the Medal of Honor for his actions on Iwo Jima, who was one of the youngest Medal of Honor recipients. He lied about his age to get into the Marines. When he returned home after grabbing 2 grenades on Iwo Jima and falling on them and surviving, even though both went off. He came back, was awarded the Medal of Honor, and then went back home and started the 9th grade. The other one was General Lewis Wilson, awarded the Medal of Honor as a young Marine on Guam, and then later became Commandant of the Marine Corps in the 1970s. I've also named 2 ships after Navy Cross recipients: Rafael Peralta, for service in Iraq, and Lena Sutcliffe Higbee, first woman awarded the Navy Cross from World War I. And as important as that is, it's also important, I think, to recognize and honor those who have strived to fulfill the promise laid out in our Constitution to form a more perfect union. Those who fought in a different way for the ideals we cherish as a nation: justice, freedom, equality. And that's why in January, when we had a new class of ships, I named the first ship the John Lewis, after the icon who was dedicated and risked his life for justice, equality, and freedom. The naming convention for this new class is to honor those who have fought for civil and for human rights. The names of the first 6 ships have chosen and they've been announced. The first is John Lewis. The second, that I named last month, is the USNS Harvey Milk, after the LGBT advocate who was assassinated 10 months after he took office as the first openly gay person to hold office in California. The third I'm going to name in a few weeks, but the name has been announced, and it's going to be called the USNS Earl Warren, after the Supreme Court Justice whose signature case, Brown versus Board, desegregating our schools, and many more cases advancing the cause of civil rights. Tomorrow, the Kennedy Library, I'll name the 4th ship of the class, USNS Robert F. Kennedy, who dedicated his life to advancing human rights in hopes of making the dream of a peaceful and just world a reality. Which brings me to why we're here today, to officially name 2 more ships, the 5th and 6th of this class, in honor of leaders who stood for justice, equality, freedom. Now, if the weather had been a little more cooperative, we would have been at the Boston Women's Memorial. And these bronze statues commemorate the lives and the struggles and the triumphs of Abigail Adams, confidant and advisor to President John Adams, a strong advocate of women's rights. Phyllis Wheatley, a woman kidnapped and enslaved as a young girl, whose poetry inspired the leaders of the American Revolution. And finally, the abolitionist and suffragist, Lucy Stone. Lucy Stone, born into a large family in rural Massachusetts, and despite being discouraged by her father and brothers, she educated herself, worked as a teacher, and became one of the first women in America, and the first in Massachusetts, to earn a college degree. Having experienced discrimination early in her life, she was drawn to the abolitionist movement while studying at Oberlin College. And when she graduated, she embarked on a career as a lecturer, a leader, and an advocate for human rights. She served in the American Anti-Slavery Society, led the New Jersey Women's Suffrage Association, and sat on the executive committee of the American Equal Rights Association. Lucy Stone's influence advanced the rights movements for both women and African Americans. She helped pave the way for the passing of the 15th Amendment. The right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. She did this in the face of verbal abuse, physical assault, and excommunication. And yet, while she would never see that same right afforded to women, she remained to the cause, as is the motto of the Marine Corps, Semper Fidelis, always faithful. In describing her approach, Lucy Stone once said, "All we need to do is to continue to speak the truth fearlessly, and we shall add to our number those who will turn the scale to the side of equal and full justice in all things." Which brings me to our second sheet. One of Lucy Stone's contemporaries, who spoke the truth fearlessly and displayed the truth about justice, equality, and freedom in spirit, in act, and even in her self-chosen name, Sojourner Truth. Born in slavery, Swart killed New York in 1797, coincidentally the same year the United States Navy came into existence. By the age of 13, she had experienced daily beatings, separated from her family, as a result of being sold 4 times, once for $100 and a few sheep. Some years later, she fell in love with a fellow slave and saw him beaten to death after their relationship was discovered. By 1826, Sojourner Truth decided she would remain enslaved no longer. She fled to freedom with her infant daughter Sophia and was forced to leave her other 2 children behind. In describing her escape, she said, "I didn't run off, for I thought that wicked. I walked off, believing that to be all right." Shortly after freeing herself, she learned that her son Peter, then 5 years old, had been illegally sold to a man in Alabama. She took the issue to court and eventually secured Peter's return from the South. The case was the first in which an African-American woman successfully challenged a white man in a United States court. And in the following years, Sojourner Truth lectured in New York, Michigan, Ohio, many other places, delivering her most famous speech, commonly referred to as the Ain't I a Woman, in Akron in 1851. In that speech, she demanded equal human rights for all women and all slaves. Later, in 1853, when an angry mob interrupted her with hisses and groans, she responded, "You may hiss as much as you please, but women will get their rights anyway. You can't stop us neither." Comment, which pretty much epitomizes our Navy motto, "Semper Fortis, forever courageous." Both Sojourner Truth, Lucy Stone, fought relentlessly and ceaselessly for all human rights, including things like prison reform and property rights and universal suffrage. Yet abolition was the only cause for which they thought that they were able to see realized in their own lifetimes. But as Lucy Stone said, in the long run, every other good thing is sure to be obtained. And in 1920, the 19th Amendment was passed, guaranteeing women's right to vote. Now, unfortunately, in a lot of cases, and particularly sometimes in the military, the long run has taken way too long. Despite the fact that women have been fighting and dying in combat since the founding of this nation. When I took office in 2009, female service members weren't afforded the same opportunities or even the same level of treatment as their male counterparts. In the Navy, women were prohibited from serving on submarines, in riverine squadrons, and in the SEALs. In the Marine Corps, women were barred from certain ground combat positions. In both services, sexual assault was left largely underreported, under-prosecuted, and under-disciplined. And women, in a thing that may seem small but is highly symbolic, were required to wear a different uniform than men. While they're segregating them for full participation in the service, I want you to notice that the person singing the national anthem and that color guard were wearing exactly the same uniforms. We weren't looking at male sailors or female sailors, we were looking at United States sailors, which is the way it ought to be. So, we tried to fix some of the injustices, and we did it in pursuit of of a stronger force. I opened service submarines and riverines to women, and I've advocated for opening all positions in all services to women, which has now been done. I established the first secretariat-level sexual assault prevention and response officer, SAPRO, to combat this insidious crime. We led the Department of Defense in extending paid maternity leave. I expanded it from 6 weeks to 18 weeks, so that women were less likely to have to choose between serving their country and having a family. And finally, just as I said, we're moving toward one uniform in the Navy, one uniform in the Marines. Time and again, history has shown these are the right things to do. When we integrated the military in the 1940s, when we first recruited large numbers of women in the 1980s, when we repealed Don't Ask, Don't Tell in 2010, every time those changes were proposed, every single time, there were naysayers. There were people that said the force would be weakened, unit morale would decrease, and that we would be a less effective military. And every single time, they've been wrong. Every time, we've become strong. And every time, the Navy and Marine Corps remain the greatest expeditionary fighting force the world has ever known. We gain strength through diversity. Diversity of background, diversity of thought, diversity of perspective. In a military force, it is a dangerous thing to always think and act in the same way. A predictable force is a defeatable force. Not just diversity for diversity's sake, but diversity of experience, diversity of thinking. And to fight, and to win, now and in the future, we have to recruit and train and develop a Navy and Marine Corps from all of America, representative of and reflective of the nation it defends. If a person qualifies in every way for service, if they qualify in every way to do a particular job, how can we possibly say that they cannot share the honor of the defense of this nation because of the shape of their skin, the color of their skin, and because of who they love? We can't. We shouldn't, and now we don't. I think the women represented by these 3 bronze statues would be proud of the actions their legacies have inspired. I started by talking about Navy ships and how presence plays a unique role in national security. Lucy Stone, in another quote, said, "I believe that the influence of women will save the country before every other power." Since U.S. Navy ships and Navy Marine Corps presence in many ways are responsible for protecting this country, I think it's benefiting that our 2 newest ships be influenced by women. Now, I'm getting to the end. Hold on. My other great responsibility I have is in naming the sponsors of these ships. Sponsors imbue the ships with their spirit. Every time there's a new captain of these ships, one of the first calls that captain makes is to the sponsor. The sponsor breaks the bottle of champagne across the bow and stays in touch with that ship while it's in the fleet. So for Lucy Stone, the sponsor, the person who's agreed to be the sponsor, is a woman who has continued to fight for human rights. Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Now I want to say a few words about the other sponsor. I have known Marion Wright Edelman for years, and I've admired her for years longer. Tomorrow, when I name the Robert Kennedy, I'm going to talk about Marion Wright Edelman because, as Marion Wright, a young civil rights attorney in Mississippi, she invited Robert Kennedy to the Mississippi Delta. And there were a lot of benefits to that. He emerged a changed person. We essentially eliminated hunger in America over the next few years. And Marion Wright met a guy named Peter Edelman, who was Robert Kennedy's aide, who she later married. First African-American woman member of the Mississippi Bar, and for years head of the Children's Defense Fund. Here's someone who's dedicated her life to freedom, to equality, to justice, and made sure the children of this country are able to make the most of their God-given abilities. So for the Sojourner Troop, Marion Wright Edelman is a sponsor. So, I want to officially have the honor and privilege to name our Navy's newest replenishment ships: USNS Lucy Stone, USNS Sojourner.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to introduce Ms. Marion Wright Edelman.
I'm going to try not to cry. This today ceremony feeds my soul. And I just thank you, Mr. Secretary, for the honor of being a sponsor of Sojourner Truth and Lucy Stone, two great women who have done so much for our democratic process. And I was just sitting here because the Children's Defense Fund began in Cambridge, here in Boston as well. And our logo comes from a little girl's painting that I found in Copley Square, from the old Navy hymn, or Navy slogan. The sea is so wide and my boat is so small. And so this little child's boat, which I think, describes who we are and what we need to do as a nation, says. The sea is so wide and my boat is so small, and it gets battered so much in our nation, and so I just feel as if I've come home, and I thank you for your leadership and what you've done and the symbolism of all of this, and thank you for making me a sponsor. I'm going to bring my granddaughters and my grandsons to the regular champagne, but I'm very honored. Sojourner Truth and Harriet Tubman have been my lifelong heroines, and she has been Sojourner Truth my North Star in the struggle for freedom and justice in our land. We have gone through some very difficult times, and whenever I think I'm having a bad day and I wear Sojourner around my neck, I just rub it, and say, get over it. You don't know what a hard time is. But she was an illiterate, brilliant, but allegedly illiterate slave woman. A great orator and of a powerful presence who possessed unbelievable courage and perseverance. She challenged the racial and gender caste system of slavery by suing, as the Secretary said, for the return of a son sold away from her. She got thrown off Washington, D.C. streetcars, but kept getting back on until they changed the rules and let her ride. She stood up with fiery eloquence to opponents and threatening crowds who tried to stop her from speaking. When a hostile white man told her that the hall where she was scheduled to appear would be burnt down if she spoke, she replied, "Then I will speak to the ashes." When taunted while speaking in favor of women's rights by some white men who asked if she was really a woman, she bared her breast and allegedly famously retorted, "Ain't I a woman?" detailing the back-breaking double burden of slavery's work and childbearing she had endured. When heckled by a white man in her audience who said he didn't care any more about her anti-slavery talk Then for an old flea bite, she snapped back, but then the Lord willing, I'm going to keep you scratching. And when decrying her exclusion from America's life and professed freedoms during a religious meeting, where another speaker had just praised the Constitution, she told this story. Children, I talks to God, and God talks to me. I goes out and talks to God in the fields and in the woods. This morning I was walking out and I got over the fence. I saw the wheat holding up its head, looking very big. I goes up and takes hold of it. You believe it? There was no wheat there. I says, God, what is the matter with this wheat? And he says to me, Sojourner, there's a little weasel in it. Now I hears talking about the Constitution and the rights of man. I comes up and I takes hold of this Constitution. It looks mighty big and I feels for my rights. But there aren't any there. Then I says, God, what ails this Constitution? And he says again to me, Sojourner, there's a little weasel in it. This language captured in an 1863 edition of the National Anti-Slavery Standard shares a flaw with many existing accounts of her speaking. They were often written down in the mock Southern dialect that 19th century readers identified with all slaves. Despite the fact that Sojourner Truth was born and raised in rural New York as a slave of a Dutch-speaking family, spoke Dutch as a child, took pride in speaking correct English as an adult, and reportedly sounded like white New York peers. But her messages were always crystal clear, whether in proper English or in dialect. Since Sojourner Truth's day, black and white and brown and other excluded and marginalized women and men have been trying to ferret out the unjust and greedy weasel still eating away the core of our Constitution and the promise of equal opportunity in our national life, to gain the rights and the freedoms they knew all Americans have been promised, and to build a more just nation for themselves and all of our children. And I think we're at another point of extraordinary opportunity that I hope we won't miss, to be here with our history, with our hopefulness, with our progress, in a world that is now 2/3 non-white and majority poor, and our nation's becoming majority non-white soon in our demographics. What an opportunity to really show what America can be and how we can be the model of what we have been striving to be over our centuries. So I think it's a great time to be alive. We're faced with great challenges, but extraordinary opportunities. And I think we face today huge weasels that are still trying to take hold of America's Constitution and to weaken its promise of justice this year, and we better wake up, see them, and pluck them out. The struggle for a fair playing field for all Americans and all of our children must accelerate and grow and reach a mighty roar today when our core values of equal justice and the law are under attack. And I love that you've got Justice Ginsburg as the other sponsor. I'm honored to be there with her. But we've all got to stand up and fight back, as Sojourner Truth did in her time, and as I have no doubt she would be doing today. Our nation must continue to struggle mightily to live up to its creed enunciated in the Declaration of Independence and overcome its huge birth defects that still plague us in the implementation of our political and economic system. Slavery, Native American genocide, exclusion of all women and non-populated men from America's political processes. We have come a very long way, just as you have in the Navy, and it was wonderful to watch this guard today walk up here. We have come a long way, but these deep-seated impediments to a just nation continue to challenge us, and we must remain vigilant in routing them out and be determined to move forward, not backwards, in a great nation. And I am so pleased about Robert Kennedy tomorrow. I guess I had not gotten that in my list when you were saying them earlier. Scholar Carlton Mabie tells us a bit more about how in 1865, 1 year after visiting President Abraham Lincoln in the White House, Sojourner Truth determined to desegregate the segregated horse car system in Washington, D.C. She was working with freed slaves in Washington at the time and was often ignored by drivers, and she tried to get them to stop. One day in 1965, she signaled a car to stop. Maybe he wrote. When it did not, she ran after it yelling. The conductor kept ringing his bell so that he could pretend he had not heard her. When at last the conductor had to stop the car to take on white passengers, Truth also climbed into the car, scolding the conductor, saying it's a shame to make a lady run so. The Sojourner Truth Institute says Sojourner Truth rode the horse car that day, and many horse cars afterwards, sat where she pleased, not where she was told. Her determination followed a lifetime of going where angels and her contemporaries often feared to tread. This year, I hope our nation will go where angels have not yet but are ready to tread, and that's to the Oval Office, as we stand together to absolutely shatter the last glass ceiling. I'd like to give Sojourner Truth the final words for what we have to do to achieve this new goal. Every day I wear 2 pendants around my neck, as I said at the beginning, and I feel them. But on the back of my pendant for Sojourner Truth is inscribed the following words. If women want any rights more than they've got, why don't they just take them and not be talking about it? These are our marching orders. Thank you for your time.
Ladies and gentlemen, please rise for the playing of Anchors Aweigh and the Marines Hymn.